Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. We're still about 2 minutes to start the session, so thank you for joining early. We're just going to give a few more minutes for everyone to join before we get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining early. We're still about a minute before the scheduled start time. We're going to give a few more minutes for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're just about 1 minute past start time. Got a good amount of attendees joining. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to give a few more minutes for some of the other attendees to join, and then we'll get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining early. All right. I think we've got a good quorum to get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining. People are joining from all over the world. I'm going to get started. Today's topic, so this is the third within our series of Virtuoso 101 webinars. Today's topic that we're going to cover is testing complex business applications with Virtuoso. Really excited to take that and share what the learnings that we have seen with a lot of our enterprise customers, with our partner and alliances teams. Thank you all for joining, and it's a very good crowd that and really looking forward to a fruitful discussion, as well as hoping that you would be able to learn from what we have learned so far, deploying Virtuoso with some of the largest enterprises and large customers, and testing some really complex applications, business applications with Virtuoso. With that said, I'll get started now. I'm going to share my screen. Just make sure that you can give a quick hands up if you're able to see my screen. I'm going to just start sharing it now. Okay. Right. I can see one hands up. So thank you. If you are able to see it, great. Perfect. I'm going to get started now. Thank you so much for letting me know. Um, I hope everybody is able to see the screen, and I'm going to get started now. So the topic and the agenda that we're going to cover today, the panel introductions. Unfortunately, we will not have Sean joining today. Uh, it's a bit too early for him, but it's going to be me. We're going to do a quick overview of Virtuoso. I know there are quite a lot of you who are new to the series, so I want to make sure that we run through what Virtuoso is. We're then going to cover the topic in hand today, which is testing complex business applications with Virtuoso. We're going to cover Q&A and then a call to action. So that's pretty much the agenda we're going to cover. I'm just going to quickly run through the agenda. Let's start with the panel introductions. We've got Sean, who's unfortunately not able to join today. It's very early for him, but I think this timeline works for some of the geographies I'm keen to do for the next webinar. Possibly we can do the timeline or the time zone, which would have much more coverage with the US and other geographies as well. But just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Vinay Joseph, Sales Director for Global Alliances. I've got about 20 years of experience in software engineering, QA, and sales. I would be covering off all the agenda items today, and really looking forward to learn from you guys as well as share our learning from Virtuoso and how we work with some of the large enterprises and testing of complex business applications there. Now, key takeaways. This is something that you would have seen in the emails as well, but primarily we're going to cover how do we overcome challenges in testing large-scale complex applications. I'm going to cover walk you through one by one some of the key topics and how Virtuoso helps you solve that problem. Starting with simplifying the end-to-end testing, specifically with really complex business processes and how you can automate with Virtuoso. We're going to cover quickly how it specifically works in ERP, CRM, and e-commerce systems, which would be part of the demo. And then we're also going to talk about how Virtuoso helps us unify the UI and API testing, which makes a lot of sense, specifically when you are integrating really complex applications and integrate workflows. Okay, so those are going to be the key takeaways. Let's start with Virtuoso overview. So just a quick introduction about Virtuoso and why we started. So the tool was launched in the market in 2020, and we started the company in 2017. When we started, and it's not changed much, but predominantly even now, and this is from the state of the QA and test automation surveys which were done in 2022. Even now, 80% of the testing which is done is predominantly done manually. Majority of the automation which is currently done is Selenium, but if you look at the other open source solutions as well as Selenium-based frameworks, I'm pretty sure it's going to be north of 80%. And what that unique challenges that brings up with the open source solutions are, number one, it needs really qualified estates, which cost more than manual testers. And you always have to pair an estate with a manual tester, primarily because manual testing is a way of, it's essentially a skill set which is geared towards identifying defects and also understanding the applications and the business flows really, really intricately well, which you would not be able to find that skill set in estate and typically in estates as well. So what you would do is you normally pair your estates with really good manual testers. And that essentially brings the problem that it costs way more to run your test automation projects, which essentially means you deliver a poor ROI. And that essentially leads to the problem at hand, which is you would predominantly test manually because you're not able to get to the ROI of creating test automation projects. And also, when you're using open source solutions, you're spending 80% of your time maintaining those solutions, which in the agile world is a big problem, because if you are going to release software every day or every week or every 2 weeks, it essentially needs a solution which would have less amount of rework and maintenance and more focus on building new journeys. So those were some of the problems that we started solving when we released the product in the market in 2020. What is Virtuoso? Virtuoso is an AI-powered end-to-end functional testing platform, which is focused on web applications and business systems, primarily geared towards speeding up test automation by 10x, which essentially means it would deliver real savings and would allow you to achieve your business success pretty quickly in terms of product releases, making sure that your velocity of your sprints and projects is going up, and so on and so forth. Now, where are we being used? So in the last 4 years, we've been rolled out across some of the biggest companies across the globe. We're working with large insurance companies, GSIs like yourself. We're working with fintech companies, e-commerce, healthcare companies, healthcare product companies, ERPs, and a lot more large companies, which essentially are using Virtuoso to deliver the savings in test automation projects. Now, let's just try and understand what Virtuoso is primarily being used for. I'm just going to hide this so that everybody can see the text. So primarily, it's for front-end UI and UX, as well as API. It's focusing primarily on functional integration, visual compatibility. We are able to facilitate accessibility and security scanning, but that's not the primary use case, and something similar that we can do with performance with JMeter testing, but it's not a primary use case. What we are used for is primarily testing any web applications, test automating any web applications, whether they are custom web applications, enterprise systems, digital transformation projects, and migration projects. And business drivers is primarily where you are moving to a quality first strategy. You want to automate very quickly. You want to move it to a CI/CD and DevOps pipelines, and then essentially where you have critical web applications you don't want to release without automated testing. Now, how it's delivering all of the good things that I spoke about in the previous few slides. Number one, we've got a feature called live authoring, which essentially allows you that when you're writing your test cases, you can actually see how those test steps are behaving in real time against your applications. And more importantly, all of those test steps are written in plain English. So essentially, it's a low-code based solution, which allows you to get your STETs as well as your manual testers to become adept at automating your tests very quickly and also maintaining it very quickly, because what we are bringing to the table, as I spoke about some of the white spaces and the problems that we face in test automation projects, is removing the maintenance aspect pretty much with the AI intervention. So what we are bringing is all the manual work that you need to do in maintaining the test cases. It typically is managed through your SNETs, is now going to be handled by Virtuoso self-healing feature, which essentially eliminates your need to do a lot of manual intervention when you're maintaining your test kits, and the focus would be on building more test cases. Now, how does that affect you as a GSI partner or as a GSI who's basically working for test automation projects for your end customers? Number one, it lowers your resource costs, primarily because whether it's a manual tester or a STET, you can, both of them can equally start using the test automation solution with Virtuoso. Number two, it really truly shifts lefts. What that essentially means is you would be, which is what all our enterprise customers are seeing, they're able to start their automation activity within the sprint or complete their in-sprint feature automation within the sprint itself. And all of that is leading to transition to a leaner team where you're moving away from a separate manual as well as automation tester to a single team, which you would be able to utilize across the software development lifecycle, right from your system testing all the way to even deliver value for your user acceptance test. Now, that brings us to the topic at hand today, which is testing of complex business applications with Virtuoso. Guys, if you have questions, I'm just going to stop there. Quick pause. If you have questions in between, just feel free to drop a note. More than happy to take some of those questions. I'll just ask Deepa, help me if there are questions being
Yes,
posed as I
yes,
speak.
Vinay. So we had three questions. The first one was, does it support does Virtuoso support enterprise applications like SAP, Salesforce, etc.?
Mhm.
Uh, I think we are going to cover it in detail in the coming
Yeah.
slides. And our second question is, how is security testing handled in Virtuoso?
Absolutely. So we'll cover some of those very quickly as well. Number one, absolutely. You can test any web-based applications, whether it's S/4HANA, Salesforce, Dynamics 365, ServiceNow, anything which can load on a in a web browser can be tested absolutely with Virtuoso. However, I want to sound out caution here. We do not yet support desktop-based applications. So if you're going to use SAP GUI, that's not the best solution that we would be deployed for. We do not yet support GUI, but and desktop-based applications or mobile native applications. But anything that you want to test on a browser-based, whether it's a mobile web browser or a desktop-based browser, that's absolutely the use case that we are working towards. And I will talk about how AI is leveraged across the board in all of these areas, which we will be covering off as part of our demo and when we are covering the topic at hand. Now, the other questions, Deepak, can you just remind me? I think
Yes,
about
yeah,
one of the
sure.
questions. Yeah,
How is security testing handled in Virtuoso?
yeah, good question. So, as I said, that's not the primary use case that we are working with. However, what we do enable as one of the features is to use your test automation scripts, which are going to all of the web pages, and you can combine open source tools like OS Zap with your test automation journeys that you've written in Virtuoso to when those test automation journeys are executing, basically it would be able to identify all your dynamic application security tests and the vulnerabilities which can be identified from a dynamic application security testing. So that is a feature, and I'm more than happy to post some videos and send you out some videos and point it to locations where you can get more information on that. But that's absolutely supported. But we do not support static application security testing. So it's not something that we would do at a code level, but anything which can be um, identified as part of your automation journeys with dynamic application security testing, that is supported with Virtuoso and its integration with OS app. All right. Now let's
Right.
just go ahead and
We have
understand.
one more question if you would
Go
want
ahead.
to answer it
Yeah,
now. All
go
right.
ahead. Go
So
ahead.
uh, the last one is, does this support synthetic data generation? If yes, how is the client data security maintained?
Absolutely. So we absolutely have a synthetic data generation. In fact, we have integrated with an AI-based test data generator as well, which essentially means that you can create test data at a click of a button by just describing what type of test data, and I'll be demoing that shortly. Now, how is the test data security handled? So number one thing to understand, we are a SaaS-based platform. We are hosted on AWS. We are also SOC 2 Type 2 certified, which essentially means that we go through all the stringent processes to ensure that customers' data, which is ideally should be test data, not production level data, because you're not supposed to use production level data in your test environments. But if you are using any customer data which is on our platform is completely secure, primarily with the SOC 2 Type 2 compliance and all the processes that we follow to ensure that enterprise data is completely secure. It is encrypted at rest as well as in transit as well. Okay. All right. With that, let's take questions after I cover a few more areas of specifically testing complex business applications with Virtuoso. So let's get to the topic at hand, and let's just define what is complexity. And we've all seen this, right? You're all working with large enterprises with um, architectures looking what you see on the left-hand side. And that's typically characterized by a layered architecture, multiple interconnected, interdependent, and external systems which are integrated to the overall architecture, databases, pipelines, and different synchronization mechanisms. Very high availability, which is very typical for large enterprise customers where they would need high availability, security, and regulatory compliance, which essentially causes a lot of concerns when you are testing functionality, because you're just not testing functionality. You need to be absolutely 100% sure on your non-functional requirements, including security, performance, etc. That's not a primary use case, but I'm just describing what are the typical scenarios that you would see, and automated orchestrations and real-time processing as well. You want to get through, say, straight through processing as much as possible, which is something which is on the agenda of every CIO and CTO that we speak to. So all of this is bringing in the complexity, which essentially makes testing, and not just testing, test automation specifically, really, really complex. Now, how do we tackle that? And how do we go from what you see on the left-hand side to the right-hand side? Make sure that you're able to get your projects through, and you're able to define the right test automation solutions to handle that level of complexity, and at the speed, and give you the velocity, speed, and the low maintenance that you require. So let's just understand each of these aspects. There are multiple aspects which are key considerations for test automation for complex systems. And this is the learnings that we have encapsulated on a single slide. But for each of these topics, I'm going to showcase how that is enabled in Virtuoso as well, right? So let's start with the comprehensive test strategy, which is absolutely a given. When you're coming up with a comprehensive test strategy, you need to cover off test automation specifically. You need to have a strategy of what you're going to automate, when, and which phases, and that's going to become your guiding path. If you don't have it defined very clearly in terms of what I'm going to automate, what areas I'm going to start with, and what is the level of coverage and automation that I want to get to, it would be very difficult for you to get to success very quickly into the program, right? And most importantly, when you have this level of complexity, you want to break down and make sure that whatever you're automating is basically aligned to overall business objectives, business requirements, user stories, epics, etc. And that becomes very, very clear, concise view as and visualization is really, really important. And let's just try and understand how we can achieve that with Virtuoso. So let's just take an example, and I'm going to do a quick tour of Virtuoso. Um, I'm hoping that everybody can see the tool now on the system, on your screens. Just give me a quick hands up or thumbs up if you're able to see it. Perfect. Thank you so much. So what we see on the screen is the Virtuoso tool. There is nothing for you to download, install, or configure. You just type in the URL and you get started with everything that you need to automate your web applications, your APIs, and anything that you need to make sure that you can author your test cases, you can execute them, maintain them, and report on them, as well as integrate it with all your test management and other tooling, all from this console. So as an organization, you can create multiple projects, which is typical of large enterprises. They would have multiple projects, which may be running in different silos, as well as you would have your end-to-end scenarios, which would be running across the different systems as well. For a project, you can create multiple goals, and within a goal, you would have a collection of these test cases, which would be defined as a goal. So The goal is primarily a collection of these test cases, which is aligned to your test life cycle objective or a functional module within your application. So if you're looking at an insurance application, you may want to break it down and say, hey, I'm going to put all my policy related tests in one module, one goal, all my claims and settlements and so on and so forth in different goals. That's one way of um, you putting together your tests, or you could align it to your test lifecycle objectives, where you could say all my sprint tests go into one goal, all my regression tests go into another goal, and so on and so forth. And we'll see how all of these come together. Now, most importantly, if you are writing a test case, essentially you would be able to write an end-to-end business process within a single test case. We call them journeys. A journey is equivalent to a test case, but the major difference being that it can cover an end-to-end business process. So let's take a simple example of a product to payment process in the e-commerce system. So you would navigate to the application, you would search for a product, you would do a checkout, you would make a payment, you would validate the transaction confirmation screen. But then you also want to, within that process, open up your backend order management system and confirm if the order has passed through to your backend order management system or your warehouse system where it can be processed. This you can do it with UI, or you can connect to your APIs and confirm that. And similarly, you can go to your user inbox and confirm if they've got all the right emails and so on and so forth. But more importantly, everything is written in plain English. So all of your end-to-end test automation can be written in plain English with simple English language syntax, which allows you to maintain it very quickly. And it doesn't matter if it's an API call, a really complex scenario, you want to store some elements and then do some assertions, all of that can be covered off with the syntax that is provided with Virtuoso, as well as extensions that you can create. And we'll cover that off very quickly as well. Now, going back to the topic where you want to visualize what you have broken down in your applications and what is the level of coverage you are able to achieve. And that simple mechanism is available with Virtuoso, primarily with the requirements tab. So this, you can just import your requirements, make sure that you can drag and drop your feature files or user stories or any text input that you have. You can import your requirements and create those requirements. And against each of these requirements, you would be able to track what are the automation journeys that you have written, which fulfills the requirements for this test case, or for this user story or requirement or epic, right? And that automatically gives you a visual mechanism to validate what is the level of coverage that you're able to achieve within your project, which is important mechanism to understand where does your focus need to be in terms of manual testing. But not just that, it goes one step further. And at any point in time, it can give you a view of among the test automation journeys that you have written, how many of them are passing, failing, or not executed. And this gives you a dashboard in terms of getting you the view of the state of the quality of your application at any point in time. And that just makes it very concise and visual, and very important for you to manage complex applications, because at any point in time, you would be able to come in and understand against each of your requirements, which areas of my requirements are passing, which areas are failing, and which have not been automated or executed so far. And coverage has not been achieved in terms of automation. Right. So that's one mechanism by which Virtuoso allows our customers to understand the level of complexity in your user stories and requirements, and how it aligns to what you've automated so far and what is passing and failing as well. Now, the third most important thing would be focusing on a test automation framework which prioritizes on velocity and reusability. You want to make sure that if you're able to find defects, you are able to find defects very early. And the sooner you can automate, the more chances that you would be able to identify defects before they go into production than later. So typical scenarios that we have encountered when we come in and start working with our enterprise customers is majority of their test automation, which were driven by open source solutions or legacy commercial tools, were happening in N+2, N+3 kind of scenarios. So there is a feature which comes out in the nth release. By the time it's automated, it would be N+2 or N+3, which essentially means that until that is automated, number one, you would have to prioritize manual testing, which takes up more effort. Number two, with the manual testing, there is a good chance that you would not uncover defects, and there is a chance that there's high defect leakage, which essentially means that your defects are identified in later stages, either when you are doing either in production or much later in user acceptance testing, which essentially means that your cost to fix those defects go exponentially high. So let's just understand a bit about how Virtuoso allows you to reduce the amount of time it takes for you to write test cases. So we've understood how we can map your requirements and start creating test cases. But let's just understand how it allows you to write test cases very quickly, which directly affects the velocity of your test sprints and the productivity of your test resources in terms of how quickly they can churn out and how many of test cases they can churn out in a day. So let's just take a quick example of a simple insurance application. I've got this insurance application and I want to write test cases to say complete the login part. So from a reusability perspective, as soon as I type in the keyword login, I'm immediately presented with all the scenarios which have already been automated, which I can select from. But let's just, for the sake of understanding how quickly we can write test cases, let's assume that we need to create a checkpoint very quickly. So we'll just create a checkpoint. If I have to write a test case and write something into this username text box, all I need to do is say, hey, write $username, which is a variable that I've already defined in my environment. Okay. In the field input, username. Okay. I can just as well write username and that should be enough as well. But as soon as I type it in, it basically identifies the username field on the screen, and real time you can understand how that test is behaving against your application. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is you can even write this test case pre-development, in the sense before your dev environment or test environment is ready. If you have your clickable wireframes, you can as well write those test cases, and I'll explain how it would work even when you point it to the real environment. So now this is how you write into a username field. Similarly, we want to write it into a password field. We just say, hey, write it into the field input called password. So I'm only taking the hint which is available on the screen that I can see, and I'm passing it to the NLP syntax, and it automatically identifies that element through intelligent identification of elements. So it's basically using real-time AI to make sure it can scan through the DOM and predict that element very quickly. Similarly, if I need to click on a button, so I just say click button login, and it basically understands that I'm going to try to click the button login, and it would just complete the login process. Now, if I want to validate I've reached the correct page, I can just say look for this element called home page, which is essentially a assertion to confirm that I've landed on the home page. I can even use a wait command and enable it to make sure that I can go through these. So this is how you would be able to write test cases very quickly, right? Now, it not just allows you to do that, but let's just take an example where we have to create a new customer or a new policy. So if I just click on, say, a new customer button, and if I just do that, it essentially takes me to the page where I can create a new customer. Now, uh, either I can write each of these steps one by one, or I can use AI authoring. And this is where we're bringing the power of AI to reduce the amount of effort it takes for you to create test cases. If I want to just select the area within the screen on which I want to apply this AI authoring, And then I give a scenario to say that, hey, fill the fields with random values, and and fill the form, uh, fill the form fields with random values. And I just mentioned that, and I say generate. Basically, it takes in the queue which I'm providing, and it would basically scan the page, and it would automatically suggest all the test cases that you would need to add, or you would typically run on the screen that you've selected. So that's essentially using generative AI, pointing it to a screen and say, hey, tell me all the test cases that you need to run. So it's, if you see here, it is not just suggesting the right fields, but it also is suggesting the fields which you want to assert and confirm if the correct form has been loaded correctly or not, right? And all of this, you can basically see if you want to change it, you can regenerate it as well. And you can just add it to the journey. And that essentially allows you to create test cases very quickly, which is focusing not just on creation very quickly, but it's also focusing on reusability. And let me explain what the reusability part works. So anything that you're creating, you can basically add it as a library checkpoint. By default, it is reusable within a goal. But if you add it as a checkpoint library, it becomes essentially a reusable checkpoint across your project. Now, what that allows you to do is, if you've already written snippets to create a policy, fill a form, create a user, and all of that set of test steps, you can combine them as a checkpoint, and then you can just keep adding them. And that would just allow you to make sure that new checkpoints can be added very quickly. And it would allow you to create and reuse your checkpoints that you've already created across your end-to-end scenarios, across the different test cases as well, right? I'm going to take a quick pause before I get into the self-healing aspect. Any questions, Deepa, that you want me to cover off now before we proceed?
Yes, we have three questions.
Mhm.
Anupama says, when do you say mobile browser is feasible? Are you
Mhm.
testing it actually on mobile?
Absolutely right. So, Nupama, to answer your questions, we are testing it on mobile. We are integrated with both Browser Stack and Lambda Test. So, essentially, what it allows us to do is the journeys that we have written, you can basically execute it on multiple OS browser combinations, be it desktop devices or actual mobile devices. And that is essentially coming from device clouds and not simulators. That answers your question.
Right. Uh, Next question is from Jaswant.
Mhm.
He says, does it support mobile and desktop tests?
Yeah, so mobile I've already covered. So mobile web, we do not cover native mobile applications, but anything which is browser-based mobile apps, absolutely we do. On the desktop-based applications, currently we do not support desktop-based applications. We are primarily focused on web-based applications and APIs.
Okay, and we have another question from Jaswant. He
Mhm.
says, which LLM does Virtuoso is using to generate the test cases through AI?
Yeah, so we are using the OpenAI enterprise LLMs, which essentially means that it's the most secure form of LLMs. It's something which we are using across a lot of other AI scenarios, and I will be covering that off very quickly as well. Okay.
Okay. We have four more questions. You want to take them now? Do you want
Can
to
I?
continue and then?
Yeah, let's just make sure that I cover off some of the major aspects, and then we'll come back to the
All
questions.
right.
And
Okay. Sure.
so, thank you. All right, so let's just understand that now we've written the test case, but what happens in the background when we are writing the test cases? So as soon as we are writing the test case, what the tool is doing in the background, it's capturing all the ways to get to that element through its XPath IDs, CSS selectors, IDs, or anything that is available for us to get to that element. It would but basically just capture that without any manual intervention. You do have the option to change these things, but it's automatically capturing all of that. Now, what all of this capturing does is, and I'm just taking an example for Salesforce because it's quite notorious with the complexity of UI. But because it's capturing all of that, it would allow us then to use a self-healing feature such that if anything changes in the next time it runs, in the next execution at runtime, the tool automatically understands, hey, there are some selectors which I had captured earlier and they are broken. I'm not able to use this to reach to this element. And what I would do is the tool will just basically at runtime predict the element on the page based on all the information, and using machine learning, it would just make sure that it would predict that, and it would just continue to run your journey without any manual intervention. So this way, your teams can focus on building new test cases while the tool just handles all the self-healing that is required to ensure that your manual intervention is completely eliminated. And this test cases once written can just continue to execute without any changes. Yes, you would have to come in and change if there are business changes. So for example, if you've added a new field, if you deleted an existing field and you've created a new form, you would have to write those test cases. But anything from a regression perspective, which changes that happen from the developers or from UI-based frameworks and enterprise applications like Salesforce, which just automatically changes all of the IDs and things like that, it takes care of all of that. So the focus shifts on the maintaining of applications is completely taken care by self-healing, and the teams can focus on building new test cases. So that essentially significantly impacts how your velocity um, is for is it can be improved with the reusability that brings in. And that brings in all the complexity in managing the test data in environments, right? So it's not just the fact that, hey, you have written a test case, but you can also make sure that the same journey can run with different scenarios and different test data that you have already created with your test data, right? So if you have your test data that you want to pull in into this solution, you can just import the test data. If you already have test data available, you can just browse a CSV file and it would automatically create that. Otherwise, you can just create your own test data. So you can just describe, hey, can you create 10 rows of names, mobile numbers, addresses, and uh, postcodes, right? And it would basically just take the inputs that you are provided, and it would automatically synthetically generate the test data that you require, so that your test cases can use the test data which is available and synthetically created to run and make sure that every journey can use a unique data that you would want to use. Now, this essentially is where test data creation is again, Gen AI is being used to make sure that whatever your test data requirements, you can just use it. But even further, going further, if you already have test data and you want to make sure that you edit with AI and it can just create more rows, you can do that as well. And it would just create all of those new test data with the edit AI console as well, right? Now, this is how AI is leveraged in creating synthetic data, and that is absolutely critical. And it's not just the test data part, it's also the environment complexity, because you would need to write test cases in such a way that it can, the same test case that you've written can work on your dev environment. But hey, if you're pointing it to different data and different and sort of uh, environments which are available with test and pre-prod and all of those, you should be able to just switch the environment and make sure that the same journey can work on multiple environments as well. And that is where this comes in, where you create an execution plan and you can choose the different environments you want to run your journeys on. So you can create an execution planner, which not only you can configure the different OS browser combinations you want to run the test on, but you can also schedule it. You can also select the environment. You can define the number of tests you want to run in parallel based on the higher the environment, the more parallels you can run so that your regression test time can reduce. And you can select the journeys with multiple options, like with tags. Hey, if I've got a smoke test that I want to run on a pre-prod environment, I will just select the smoke test tab or build live tab, and it would just pull in automatically all the journeys that I've tagged with the smoke test. And it can either run on a data-driven way, where even I can select which rows I want to run from that test data, or I can just basically execute it without a test data-driven mechanism as well, which will take the default data that you provided in your test cases. And this way, you can handle the complexity of multiple test environments and all the test data as well with Virtuoso. Now, let's just take an example and take some of the other aspects which are very, very critical. So this is where it becomes really, really imperative that you use a scenario where you can combine your UI as well as API. And a lot of our customers are doing that, primarily because majority of the times they are using third-party integrations and third-party interfaces, which they would not have access to, and they're using APIs to fulfill that mechanism. But they would want to know that if I do a transaction with a UI, I can also validate with a third-party API if all my backend integrations and orchestrations are working fine. And this is where you can combine that power in Virtuoso. So when you're writing your end-to-end journey in Virtuoso, you can not just write the UI part, but you can also write your API journeys. So you can write your checkpoints with API. You can call in any API. You can make sure that you can pass the parameters, either static or dynamic parameters that you want to create. And you can even call uh, the response variable that you want to validate. And that basically makes an API call. You can then immediately assert the response variable to confirm if the requested data from the API, the expected data from the API is getting retrieved correctly or not. So this way, you can combine the UI and API in a single flow, which allows you to test really complex applications, break it down in complexity, and make sure that the end-to-end integrations can be tested. And this is of a lot of use when you are testing even ERP and complex applications from enterprise applications as well. So for example, Dynamics 365, right? Here, if you are testing Dynamics 365, you would want to go to an end-to-end, or if it's testing an end-to-end insurance process, which may have multiple touch points. You may have a touch points to a really complex journey to create a party and then make a payment or do a partial surrender or create a new business, and you will have bad jobs in between. All of these can be orchestrated with what we call it as flows. So when you define flows, you can define and we are coming up with a new feature within flows, which would make the orchestration much more easier. But you can define that, hey, once my UI journey is run, I want to run the batch jobs to confirm if the backend journeys are working fine. So I can trigger the batch jobs with my APIs and make sure that, or different other mechanisms, and make sure that end-to-end process can be executed in a single flow. And this makes a lot of impact when you are testing really complex applications. So the complexity, you have basically broken it down and you have put it all together so that your business team will have the confidence that your complex end-to-end business transactions can be executed with Virtuoso, all written with NLP syntax, so that everything is written in plain English, but still able to combine the end-to-end complexity and confirm that not just your low-level test cases and your validations at each of these field-level validations are working fine, but my end-to-end business processes are also executed and can be automated very quickly. All right. So that essentially covers some of the important aspects. I've covered out the end-to-end automation, the maintainability aspect with dynamic error handling and the self-healing we were talking about. The other aspects which are really important for your complex test automation is also integrating NFT into the flow. So I did talk about making sure that you can integrate it with your OS app. So that's a feature which is available where you can integrate your dynamic application security testing with OS app. with Zap Proxy. And what that allows you to do is essentially when you're running your end-to-end journeys and it's going through each of these transactions, the OS Zap is also capturing all the vulnerabilities from a dynamic application security perspective immediately, and that allows you to understand while you're running your test cases what are the vulnerabilities which you need to attend to as well. And that covers the NFT part of it. And then there's continuous integration and monitoring, governance, and reporting. So let's just cover continuous integration. So all of this that I've spoken to, all the execution plans that we've created, the journeys that you've created, it can all be triggered to your Jenkins or other mechanisms as well. So if you've got your Jenkins or any of these mechanisms which are available, you can just integrate it seamlessly so that there's a simple shell script that we've written, which allows you to integrate with any DevOps tool so that when you execute your DevOps pipelines, basically you can actually see those tests getting triggered within your test tools, so that when you trigger those pipelines, you can initiate the testing from Virtuoso. It gets the results back, and then you would be able to see those results back in your pipeline where you would be able to understand whether your tests have passed, and then you can take the deployment decisions accordingly, right? So that essentially is really, really critical for you to make sure that your regression test suite is automatically triggered, is integrated with your DevOps pipelines, and is identifying defects every time there is a commit or whatever you choose to run it on. And this also can be integrated with your test management tooling. So if you have, for example, Test Trail or Jira X-Ray, you can just make sure that whenever your tests execute in Virtuoso, it is also immediately making sure that those results are written back into your test management tooling, whether you're using X-Ray or Jira X-Ray or ALM, for example, as well. All of those are supported, and that allows you to run all your tests in Virtuoso, but the reporting continues to be run through your test management tooling. And that is really important for you to make sure that you can write the metrics, drive all the corrective mechanisms and the governance which is required for your test automation projects, especially for really complex systems, right? And from a reporting perspective, it's not just covering the integration with TestRail, but we are also allowing you to look at reporting in a more comprehensive way within Virtuoso. So you will have a lot of reports that are available out of the box, which you would be able to see in terms of all the executions that have happened from a time frame perspective for which each project, how many journey executions are passing or failing, and also the reasons of why these failures are happening. So I haven't talked about root cause analysis, and that's another AI feature which we have integrated. So every time you identify a failure within your test, you can also ask AI to identify why this has failed, right? Because whenever we are running those tests, we are capturing a lot of information, the page source at the point of failure, the network logs, and the console logs. So the tool can actually just analyze all of that information, and the AI, the Gen AI feature, would basically summarize that for you so that you can then take it to your Jira defect when you're creating a Jira defect, and it can be just created with a one step, one click, and it would automatically fill in all the information from the screenshots to the root cause analysis tab, links, and all the information that you would need to create a Jira defect as well. And that is a one-step integration, which allows you to make sure that all your identified defects or failures can be converted into defects if that needs and warrants it to be. Okay. With that, I'm just going to take a quick break and try and cover off all the questions that we can. So over to you, Deepa. Want to make sure that we can cover off as many.
Absolutely. So we have 15 questions to answer now. All right. So I'll be very quick.
Sure, go ahead.
Wouldn't AI authoring would be embedded? Wouldn't AI authoring would embed defect into the script if there is an issue with one of the fields in the page?
Uh, So if there is an issue, you have the mechanism to validate it when you're doing it in the live authoring. So it is AI authoring is identifying and creating, generating those test steps for you, but you have the mechanism to validate it when you are running your test cases in the live authoring mode, right? So this is a mechanism when you're writing your test cases and making amendments, you can absolutely do that before you publish the script and make sure that everything is working fine. So those are mechanisms. So for example, if you identify an error in the way you've written the test steps, you can basically make sure that you can fix it by just pointing to that uh, text box, and it would automatically fix it. And you can continue to validate the end-to-end scenario and see where those defects are validated before you publish it. Okay, but it does reduce the amount of time it takes for you to write and generate all of these test steps one by one. So if you're looking at really complex applications where there are hundreds of fields to be filled in, rather than filling that in one by one, this is one mechanism which would immediately create not just the test scripts to user actions, but also the assertions to validate if each of these fields are loading correctly or not. Deepa,
Right.
next
Yes.
question.
Ashwini. Ashwini asked, can you give us a demo on how to automate APIs using Virtuoso?
Yeah, I believe I've already done that. But essentially, it's as simple as just writing API call. You can just import your API into your API manager by either your Postman collections. So if you have Postman collections, just drag and drop your Postman collections, or you can create it manually. You can specify what are the URLs, whether it's a get post, etc. Once you've done that, you just go to your journey, you make that call to the API, and you do an assertion to confirm if the expected response from the API is received correctly or not. That's as simple
Great.
as it is. So you can basically make a layer, and a lot of our customers are doing it. They are making a sequence of these API calls, so one after the other, one after the other. So input from output from one API becomes an input to the other API. So you can actually validate your end-to-end business processes from an API perspective as well, um, apart from just doing the UI and API integrations, which we have explained here.
Great. Next question is from Tamara. Do you need to use specific words, languages as commands, that is click instead of select?
Yeah. So it's primarily NLP. Um, there is an NLP syntax which is available. It's essentially um, the simple natural language extensions or natural language scripts which is available. So which is all your English language verbs. So it's just navigate, click, write, wait. But that's a good question because it brings me to one of the things that I haven't covered yet. But if you feel that you need to write an NLP syntax on your own, which is a little bit more custom assertions, or maybe write a for loop or execute a certain command on JavaScript, you can also do that by creating extensions. So what extensions allow you to do is create a custom NLP syntax, which probably do a little bit more than what you would want your standard NLP syntax to do. It could be as simple as or as complex as comparing a PDF, and as simple as converting a string to number before you do an assertion or a validation, or even do OTP authentication, right, with your Dynamics 365 or any other OTP mechanisms. And these, you can also use the AI assistant to provide um, basically it's instructions which would generate the JavaScript syntax, which allows you to basically create that custom NLP syntax as well, right? So here again, the AI assistant is available to make sure that custom NLP syntaxes can be created as per your project requirements. Okay. We've got a few
Great.
more minutes. I'm happy to extend by a few more minutes if people want to stay back to cover some of the questions. But what I would do is we'll try and find a mechanisms. You're more than happy to note down the details from a call to action perspective. I wanted to cover some more details, but feel free to reach out to us, either to me, Vinay Joseph. Here's my email ID, and I'll paste it Deepa, if you can paste mine and yours on the chat so
Sure.
that
Sure.
if people want to follow up with these questions as well, we're more than happy to do it offline after the event. But I'm
All
more than
right.
happy to extend by a few more minutes just so that we can cover off some questions.
All right. So the next question, I think you have already answered it. Does it support QTP? Does it support OTP in Salesforce? We need to provide OTP while logging in. How is that being handled here?
Yeah, so absolutely. So you can create custom NLP syntax, which we have done. We've got a guide with some extensions which are available for you to download and start using immediately. And two-factor authentication is something which is pretty standard. Um, Majority of customers are using it because they are using two-factor authentications and they're not switching it off in their test environments. So absolutely, it's absolutely doable, and it's being used by a lot of our active customers on for testing D365 as well as Salesforce, etc.
Okay. The next question is from Sheetal. How the tool is identifying the element?
Yeah. So that's again, it's the intelligent identification mechanism that we have built in. So it's essentially using the hints that we are providing, scanning the page, and it's also using referential mechanism. So if you are on a username and or if you are on a page which has multiple um, links of the same name or the same hint, it can basically identify based on the nearest link as well. So if you are navigating a complex table with the same button being available there, or you're doing something much more simpler, it is absolutely doable with essentially the syntaxes which are available to you. So you can give hints like, hey, you want to click on an add to back button. So if I just run this journey and I'll just give a pause here. So if you are looking at the border not found element, which is essentially an element on the page, and if you then say click on add to bag, it would automatically click the add to bag button on the screen just next to border not found. But you can also say, hey, I want to click on top left add to bag, and it would automatically take the topmost and leftmost add to bag button. And this way, there's a lot of referential syntax that you can provide. So where based on the reference of unique elements, it can identify which element it needs to click as well. And that's
Fantastic.
essentially how the intelligent identification of elements is happening. And it's giving you a live authoring mechanism to look at and confirm if it's identifying the right element with the right selectors as well.
Right. And we are just on time. We have 19 more questions to go.
Oh,
And
okay.
I have shared, yeah, I have shared our email IDs with everybody here. We will please feel free to share your additional questions in this email ID. We will certainly respond back to you. And on top of that, all the questions which are being answered today and which are not being answered as well, we would send out an email with all the queries so that you can reach out back to us in case you want to have a deeper discussion, right? So,
So,
Vinay, do you want to take 2 more minutes
yeah.
to address one or two questions? All right. Okay.
So I think what we'll do is I just want to make sure that before I do that, for the people who are going to leave, I just want to make sure that we cover off the call to action. So absolutely, we're going to run the series of webinars every month for all our alliances. Majority of you are working in companies which we are already part of, and we're working with your alliances teams. We're working with active projects as well as working towards getting more active projects from your alliances teams and QE teams. So feel free to reach out to us. You can either send a direct email to myself or Deepa. And if you want to look for more information, you can go to our website, virtuoso.qa.com and virtuoso.qa. There's a documentation guide, and we've got a lot of videos on more than 400 videos in terms of how Virtuoso can be used in our video library on YouTube, and we're more than happy to share some details. If you will go to the Virtuoso website, you would be able to find a lot of details on that. With that, yeah, let me just cover off a few more questions. So Deepa, feel free to raise some of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, we have a question. You just demonstrated that example, write XYZ in input field username. So is there a
Mhm.
commands that we have to follow for adding the steps? can we simply say type XYZ in user field name?
Yeah, that's exactly. So if when I was writing the username variable, instead of that, you can just say write XYZ, and you can absolutely use static text, and you can automatically link it to your test data so that it picks up one of the elements which is there in your test data table to write into as well. So those all of those options are available for you to do. It's not just the variable, it can also be the simple text that you static text that you want to provide, and also integrated with your test data as well.
Okay. And I would stop the questions here. Vinay, I am seeing Sheetal has raised her hand for a very long time.
Yeah.
Sheetal, I'm promoting you to speak. Please ask your question.
Right, Shitul.
Uh, Sheetal, you can unmute and you can ask. All right. Uh, maybe
Sorry,
uh,
actually,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
I have clicked that button by mistake, actually. Sorry.
Okay,
No
okay, no
problems. No
problem.
problems.
Yeah.
All right. I think
All
we
right.
have 4 minutes beyond the scheduled time. What we'll do is we will cover off most of these questions offline. Team, do remember that we're going to run more topics. So feel free to send out suggestions and anything else that you want to contribute to these webinars. So we've got more exciting webinars, more from a technical deep down perspective as well. So if you go to our website and check out the webinars link, you would be able to find more webinars that we are doing on technical deep dives as well. But for the next month webinar, feel free to suggest some topics if you wish for us to take those topics. And really looking forward to the next session with you guys next month. But thank you so much for attending today's. I hope this was useful for you guys. You were able to understand what Virtuoso is being used, and majority of our large enterprises with partnership with a lot of GSIs that we're working with as well. So looking forward to the future sessions as well. And thank you so
Right.
much for your time.
Thank you, everyone, and we will reach out to you with all the questions and their queries. So all of your questions will be answered. Thank you so much for attending.
All right, perfect. Thanks everyone. Take care then. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.